Muted.
On. We had a webinar around STEM, learning ecosystems, etc. And today we're going to be talking about how to talk, read, and maybe sing about how to engage the youngest residents in STEM learning. And by doing so, of course, we're going to learn ways that our adults, we and our adults, can have some fun with discovery and inquiry about their world and our world with our youngest residents. And we're so very pleased to have as our presenter today the Too Small to Fail group, which is a great title. Kara Dukakis is our prime presenter today. She is the Senior Vice President of the Strong Families and Early Learning Division at the Opportunity Institute, which includes the Early Childhood and Working Families Policy Portfolio, and Director of Too Small to Fail. Previously based at Next Generation, Too Small to Fail is a joint initiative with the Clinton Foundation, which seeks to help parents and businesses take meaningful actions to improve the health and well-being of America's youngest children, ages 0 to 5, and prepare them to succeed in the 21st century. Kara oversees the strategic direction of Too Small to Fail with an emphasis on the place-based city strategy, scaling, and evaluation. Her background includes a focus on early childhood, K-12, and post-secondary education policy, as well as child welfare and mental health policy and practice. And she will be joined today by a very special guest. We're honored to have Dr. Dana Long, a pediatrician at the UCSF Benahoff Children's Hospital in Oakland, California. She is implementing some of these materials in a campaign, including early math, in her work with Oakland families. So I will turn it over to Kara, and we'll moderate questions in the chat as we go along. So thank you. Kara, it's to you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. It's such a pleasure to be joining you and all of the participants on the webinar today to talk about early STEM, early math, and early brain and language development. I will just reiterate that I am the director of Too Small to Fail, which is a joint initiative of the Clinton Foundation and the Opportunity Institute, where I work. And the focus of Too Small to Fail is on promoting early brain and language development, including early math and early STEM activities among families with children 0 to 5, to improve their chances in school and in life. We'd really like to make this webinar as interactive as possible, which I know sometimes can be a challenge. So I'm going to pause at a couple of different points in the webinar so that you all can ask questions and hopefully share some of your experiences working with young children in the context of public housing and working with families in the context of public housing. Very briefly, here's what we're planning to do. First, I'm going to give an overview of our work with Too Small to Fail, and specifically a campaign that we run in communities. Then I'm going to talk specifically about our work on early math and early STEM and ways that you all can share information and resources and activities with families with young children focused on early math and early STEM. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dana Long, who has been an incredible and long-standing partner on the campaign with us. And she'll talk about how she shares information and models behavior on early math in her clinic at Benioff Children's Hospital, Oakland, through the campaign. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our lessons learned for the campaign. So the overall goals of Too Small to Fail are really about both increasing awareness and also sparking change in both parents and in communities in order to boost early brain and language development in children ages 0 to 5. And for parents and their young children, this is really about making small moments big. And what we mean by that is really increasing the value of meaningful engagement starting at birth between parents and young children, and doing it through everyday activities and routines like talking, reading, and singing, while parents are giving a bath or pushing a stroller to the bus stop or changing a diaper. On the community level, what we are hoping to do is to really empower the people and places in those communities to help make these kinds of moments between parents and their young children happen more often. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that in just a second. Much of this work is based on research. And in this slide, what you'll see are two graphs. This research was conducted in 1995 out of the University of Kansas, and then there's been other sort of updated research, but this is really the foundation of the research. What you see on the left-hand side is evidence that there are a certain number of words by the age of 4 that children hear from their parents and caregivers. And this graph shows that there's a difference in the number between children in lower-income families and in higher-income families. And then in the graph on the right, what you see is that the number of words that children hear by the age of 4 translates pretty directly into the number of words children speak. I mean, it's not the same number of words, but there is a direct connection between the number that they hear and the number that they speak by the age of 3. So really the important piece of this research for us is that it shows that engaging in activities like talking, reading, and singing makes an incredibly big difference on the early brain and language development of young children. And we've also seen through research that it makes a big difference in their social emotional development as well. The next slide is another way of looking at the issue of early brain and language development. And what you see on the left is a difference in what's called neuroplasticity, which is really about the different neural connections in the brain that are happening for kids first starting at birth and between birth and 6 years old, and then showing the difference between that neural activity that's happening and how active it is between 6 and 14 years old. And I think that the real point here is that there is a huge opportunity starting when a child is born to help enhance those and build off of that kind of brain activity that's going on. And you know, that really it's between the ages of 0 and 5 that brain growth and activity is the most dramatic. So we share this with parents and caregivers and providers really to just show that there's a whole lot happening in terms of brain and language growth during this period, not to make parents or caregivers feel guilty if they have a child who's older than 5 and they haven't necessarily engaged in this, but more that this is a great opportunity. And it really, the true message is it's never too late to engage in these kinds of activities. So now I'm going to shift and talk a little bit about our campaign approach. The campaign is called Talking is Teaching, Talk, Read, Sing. And we have 2 different pieces of it. One we call an air game, which is really made up of partnerships with television programs in Hollywood where we do story integrations about the importance of early brain and language development into popular shows. So we've done story integrations into Orange is the New Black, a show called Jane the Virgin, a show called Grandfathered, one on Doc McStuffins. You'll see that, you know, our primary audience is really on parents of young children. And we have a similar partnership with Univision where we do story integrations and work with them on their news programming and on their talk shows, so that they can bring information about the importance of early brain and language development to Univision audiences and Hispanic parents with young children. And that campaign is called Pequeños y Valiosos, Young and Valuable. And then we also have a number of other national partnerships, like with the American Academy of Pediatrics. We have a fair amount of national media attention, and we have a robust social media platform. What I'm really going to talk more about today, though, is our ground game and our city strategy, which is really geared in many ways towards folks like you who are working with families in communities and families with young children. And there are sort of three main components of the city strategy. One is trusted messengers who are in places where parents go with young children on a regular basis. The second is what we call environmental prompts and paid media, which are things like billboards and posters and bus shelters and sort of ads on local radio so that parents are hearing it through those means, these messages. And then we've also developed a series of tools to help sort of model the behavior for parents that we're talking about. So here they are once again. So I'm going to give a little bit of an idea of what we mean by trusted messengers. So these are really folks in people's lives who have young children who they turn to for key information about the development of their young children. And we actually did some focus groups before the campaign started, and this list is really what came out of those focus groups. So, pediatricians like Dr. Long and nurses, faith leaders, and we have a robust campaign in Tulsa, Oklahoma, using churches as the platform, child care providers, early educators, home visitors, librarians, et cetera. And these trusted messengers are really bringing both messages about the importance of early brain and language development and talking, reading, and singing during everyday routines. And they're also, in some cases, delivering materials as well. I mentioned Tulsa before. Tulsa is one of our flagship cities. We also have another flagship city in Oakland, which is where Dr. Long works. And we have partnerships with a number of other cities across the country. I also wanted to acknowledge, just in terms of Tulsa, that I know that a few folks from Tulsa Housing were planning to join this, and we're thrilled that you're on, if you in fact are. In terms of environmental prompts, I mentioned posters in bus shelters and billboards, and we have this kind of signage with these messages in a lot of different places where parents go that don't necessarily have trusted messengers. We have a partnership with laundromats across the country to make wash time talk time. And then we also have a partnership with a playground manufacturer to put panels with our creative messages and materials in playgrounds across the country. And we're doing a pilot in Tulsa in a grocery store where parents can interact with their children during the grocery shopping experience, and it's a great opportunity for early math in particular. The next slide is one of our tools, which we developed in partnership with Sesame Street and partners at the federal government. You'll see first that we have tote bags, and we also have baby blankets and T-shirts, which include our specific creative material. And they have, you can't really see from the slide, but they have prompts on them. There's a different topic for each one. Let's talk about, there's bedtime, there's bath time, there's let's talk about the bus that appears on buses. What we heard from a lot of parents when we sort of tested these messages was that they sort of understood the importance of this kind of engagement, talking, reading, and singing with their children, but they didn't quite know how to do it, and particularly for kids who are pre-verbal, they were having a hard time sort of imagining it. So the idea behind some of these creative materials is that there are prompts there that ask questions or prompt engagement in activities that are specific to the topic at hand. So we also know that parents love having books, so our materials include an age-appropriate book, both in English and Spanish. We developed with Sesame Street a guide for parents that's also both in English and Spanish that talks about the importance of talking, reading, and singing and gives ideas for how to do it. We have tip sheets that, as I mentioned, we developed with the Departments of Ed and Health and Human Services, and I'm going to talk about a little bit later about those that focus on early math and early STEM. And then we have a partnership with a free mobile health program called Text for Baby that sends text on a regular basis to parents who are expecting a baby or in the baby's first year of life, that also talks about the importance of talking, reading, and singing, and in some cases includes videos from Sesame Street. So now I'm going to just pause for a second and see if you all have any questions just about the campaign in general. If you don't, that's fine too, but please feel free to send in any questions.
This is Heidi, and in answer to my question earlier, how many people have been on Energy is Everywhere webinars, the people who did type in has not been. So welcome to all these new folks, and Karis really speaks to the power of your topic that has brought in some new participants for us today. So we welcome all of you, and certainly you can be typing in your questions in the chat box. I'll be moderating them. We don't have any questions just yet, though, Karen.
Okay, I think I'll move on, and then maybe at our next transition point, we can see if any questions have come in. So
one question did just come in.
Great.
Just as I said, there wasn't. The light started beeping. Are there funds to assist in this campaign?
That's a really good question. What we usually do, with the campaign is that we work with folks who are interested on the local level, both folks who are practitioners and working directly with families, but we also try to engage other entities. Some are public agencies, some are private foundations, some are private donors who are willing to support the campaign. So we really try to work sort of at the local level with everybody on the ground to help raise funds for this. And we have a lot of different examples from across the country of how folks have done it out of mayor's offices and through early childhood funding and through different platforms, the other platforms that I mentioned. So I will move on to early math and early STEM. We started by focusing on early math, and that was really based on the research and the connection between early math and our focus on early vocabulary and school readiness. And as I mentioned before, that really broadened to include a partnership with the federal government on early math and on early STEM. So in terms of early math and why it's important, the research very firmly shows that a couple of things. One, children's math knowledge when they enter kindergarten predicts how they do in 5th grade in terms of achievement in both math and reading, which to some people is surprising. It's actually their math knowledge at kindergarten entry is an even better predictor of their reading achievement in 5th grade than it is in their math achievement in 5th grade. So we know that it has a huge effect before kindergarten for children to build their knowledge of early math in an age-appropriate way. And then the second piece is really just that the research has also found that there's sort of a gap at kindergarten entry for kids from lower versus higher socioeconomic backgrounds. And so there definitely is an imperative to work really with all families, but to make sure we're engaging kids in lower income families in early math activities. And you know, we know that even as early as 3 years old, which is well before kindergarten entry, that some kids are already behind in terms of math, and you know, that obviously those kids who are behind, you know, when they enter kindergarten tend to stay behind, and that the kids who, you know, in the converse, enter kindergarten with better basic sort of informal math skills do better in the future. Okay, so the next slide, I'm just going to set up for a second. We're really kind of trying to define early math here, and I'm going to share a video. But in order to develop our early math materials, we did focus groups with families. And you know, while we found that there's definitely broad awareness of early brain development among families with young kids, we also saw that there was less clarity about sort of the importance of early verbal and math skills in particular, and how much a difference, you know, early math engagement and activities can make. And you know, the families tended to focus more on things like counting and shapes, as opposed to things like proportions, like bigger and smaller, more and less, or on patterns, you know, which have to do with a lot of different things that we see in our environment, just things that repeat even through song. So what we've really defined early math as is being very broad, but it really develops gradually among kids in infancy and early childhood, and it involves exploring environments. It involves kind of thinking, talking, and manipulating concrete objects through activities, and then really learning math language and skills from the adults in their lives. And that this really forms a very concrete foundation. So I'm going to play this video. It's sort of a compilation from a series that we did with the group 0 to 3, and it is included on our website, and we hope you enjoy it, and then it gives some ideas.
Look closely. What do you see? Believe it or not, this baby is doing math. Brian is exploring the idea of in and out by dropping blocks into the tube. Watch how carefully he works at this task and how his mom supports his learning by letting him do it again and again. Parents can help their children master new skills and concepts through repetition. 15-month-old Mateo is learning the concept of in front and behind as he and his dad play peekaboo with the cloth. This game helps him learn where his body is in relation to other people.
Okay, so that gives a little bit of a sense of sort of the how behind engaging in early math activities. So that you have an even more concrete sense of early math, you know, in terms of actually doing it and doing early math activities with young children. You know, what the evidence shows is that, you know, there are a couple of things that really work. I mean, one is that it needs to really match the ways that young children learn, and what we know about how young children learn is that it's, you know, it's not through like flashcards or, you know, particularly formal ways of learning early on. It really is through play and exploration and hands-on engagement. And that there are ways to engage, you know, with young kids on kind of focused math activities using kind of games and concrete objects. And you don't even really need games. You can use sort of objects around the house as well. So, you know, things that you may be surprised are developing math skills, or things like peekaboo is one of them. describing an object, that represent shapes in the environment. Like if you are playing with a ball, just describing the ball, how it's round, what color it is, it goes back and forth, those types of things. And those are for younger kids. And then in terms of toddlers and preschoolers, there is great benefit in counting steps going up and down, counting how many buses go by until your bus comes. Measuring through cooking is another way to develop early math skills in toddlers and preschoolers. Shapes in mealtime. I mentioned patterns before, matching socks when doing the laundry, etc. And there are also a lot of books that have early math themes, like the book 5 Little Monkeys, Jumping on the Bed, and The Very Hungry Caterpillar, a couple that you might have heard of. So those are just really evidence that research-based strategies can help make a big difference. So in terms of early STEM, we used the foundation of early math as a starting place. But we recently released a series of materials, as I said, in partnership with the Federal Departments of Education and Health and Human Services about STEM. And so we, started off helping families and providers sort of talk math, and we wanted to sort of move into helping them to talk STEM with very young children. So the first thing I think that's important to remember about STEM, and you may know, is that it's an acronym, and it stands for science, technology, engineering, and math, which are a lot of big concepts for talking about young kids. But STEM also really means that we're sort of talking about either those subjects individually or how they work together. But it can really mean a way of doing things that has to do with problem solving and asking questions and exploring the world around us. And those are sort of the concepts in terms of working with young children that we think are really important. So in terms of technology, children learn about technology when they're examining tools or simple machines. So it could be like an age-appropriate, everyday use of scissors, or looking at wheels on a car and seeing that they go around and they also propel a car forward, or again, looking at a bus and at, kind of windshield wipers going back and forth. So again, we for young children focus on STEM through exploring their world, again through play, and really building their curiosity about how things work in the world. And it's just important, I think, for folks to know that it can just happen everywhere they go. So we developed these series of tip sheets that have really concrete tips like that for parents and for early educators. And then we also developed a poster which has different prompts like the ones I talked about before. So again, this is downloadable on our website, and again, key ideas to encourage are things like asking open-ended questions, so not questions that kind of stop with yes and no, things like saying like, I wonder where the ants are going, how can we find out together, doing comparisons of who is faster at something, using all kinds of senses, etc. And I also wanted to say that the materials that I just talked about are available in English and in Spanish. So the next few slides leading up to transitioning to Dr. Long are little prompts that we pushed out through a social media campaign for Let's Talk About STEM. And again, these are sort of tips for parents and caregivers and providers. So the idea of narrating what you see, but really sort of emphasizing kind of nature or the things that you see in your environment and doing it with a lot of detail. So look at that big blue truck. how many wheels does it have, counting the wheels, and then saying how many are total. Another one on sort of if you're either in the kitchen or eating and just using food, not to play with food, but using food to point out that a cracker is in the shape of a rectangle, or like a piece of cheese might be in the shape of a triangle, and even tracing those to show that they're different shapes, tracing them with a finger. And then, another example is during bath time. Using water play is a great opportunity to engage in STEM activities and ask questions about sort of measurement and, ideas like full and empty and more and less, etc. And then finally, I had mentioned before using senses. So, if you're at a store, talking about what you smell or the feel and taste of different items, if you're looking at fruits or vegetables, and then asking a really specific question about it and describing it to try to get an open-ended response. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dana Long, who, as you heard, is a pediatrician at Benioff Children's Hospital, Oakland, and she's a huge champion of Too Small to Fail. She's really been leading the Talking is Teaching campaign intervention at Benioff Children's Hospital, Oakland, over the past year and a half, and she's excited to share her work with families and with you all. So I'm going to advance the slides for Dr. Long, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dana Long.
Thank you so much, Cara. And as I listen to this webinar, it's really exciting to me that there's such a national conversation about early childhood and brain development and improving cognitive skills, both in terms of early literacy and math. So I'm super excited to be on this webinar and share with you. As Cara suggested, at UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital, we partnered with what was once called Next Generation and now is the Opportunity Institute, starting in the spring of 2014, in order to be a flagship site for the research on this intersectionality between health and education and early brain development. We are focused on both early literacy with our Talk, Read, Sing campaign, as well as early math, which is mostly focused on numbers, shapes, and sorting for the older toddlers, the 2 to 5-year-olds. And it's all part of a larger hospital-wide campaign that I'll talk to you about. First, I actually want to tell you a story about this picture. So I'm a practicing pediatrician in addition to being a researcher. And one day I was in my clinic and this lovely mother came in with her newborn daughter. And as most of us are when we first bring life into the world, this mom was exhausted and was really struggling with her breastfeeding and the baby's sleep schedule and adjusting to a new relationship with her new baby. And as I went in the room, I went in with the toolkit for Talk, Read, Sing early literacy. And you can see in this picture that this mom's face just lit up because the messaging is so simple and so empowering and so doable because it gives mom cues to do what she's already doing. And it's just a lovely moment to be able to actually bring the science to real life and see how it is so sticky, how families incorporate it into what they're doing. So the early literacy component, as I suggested, it's for the very young babies, the 0 to 2-year-olds, and within our primary care clinic, we are part of a deep dive into the research where we have study coordinators that go into the rooms and talk to the families initially about talking, reading, singing. Then the pediatrician goes in and does messaging using the toolkits that you guys saw. And then we have study coordinators go back in so that we can get feedback from families about what worked, what didn't. And then we ask families again several weeks down the road about how they're actually incorporating that messaging. So for the early literacy, we recruited over 500 families into the Talk, Read, Sing arm that really focused on families spending time together and how families can support their children's brain development. Starting in January, we began rolling out our early math, and we are using the same research methodology in order to evaluate the implementation of that program. So here is an example of our clinic, and within every patient waiting room, we have messaging up. So if you look at the top image on my left, you'll see that there's signage that says, "Let's talk about food." Within our waiting room, we have signage that says, "Let's talk about feelings, let's talk about numbers." In the main hospital, we have posters up everywhere, "Let's talk about shapes." And then the bottom picture here is an area of our primary care clinic called FIND, which is an acronym that stands for the Family Information and Navigation Desk, where we look at all of these unmet social and environmental factors like food insecurity or housing instability, the ability just to have your lights working, your water working. And we have incorporated the messaging about early literacy and early math into how we talk to families about getting their basic needs met. Since in my mind, there's such a integral link between healthcare and education. Next slide. So when we start to think more about our math, there are some elements that we share with every family. So the first message is really to start with an affirmation that we know you are already talking, reading, singing to your child throughout the day. How can we encourage you to do it more, to keep doing what you're already doing because it's working? We emphasize the simplicity of the messaging so that when they're at the grocery store, when they're sorting laundry, how can they make these everyday moments into big moments? Because with young children, sometimes the small moments have huge impacts. We give very concrete, specific examples. So when you're at a stoplight, how many lights do you see? What shape are they? What colors are they? When you're at the grocery store, what color apples do you see? How many apples should we get? When you're looking at a book, what shapes do you see? How many triangles are there? We do share the research about neuroplasticity as well because families want to know the science. And so we talk about the fact that it's true that children who hear their caregivers talking, reading, singing, and doing early math will then do better in math and reading thereafter. And one of the most important things to me is that we also talk about bonding. So when you look at the vast amount of scientific literature on early childhood adversity, so kids that experience hard stuff when they're growing up, when they experience trauma, we know that resiliency comes in based upon the relationship between the caregiver and the child. And so we talk about the bond that caregivers and children form when they talk, read, and sing together. Because doing fun stuff together, it also helps with that bond so that when you're negotiating hard stuff, that kids know they have a buffer. So here's an example of some of the early math tools. And so we have these t-shirts that say, "Let's talk about numbers." We have a highlights guide where highlights worked very closely with Too Small to Fail in order to develop very practical ideas about what parents can do with their children. And so when you open up this guide, it has pictures that have these crazy looking monsters. And you can say, what color is the monster? What is they're friendly monsters, by the way. What is the monster doing? Let's tell a story about the monster. And there are also books that talk about math skills. And so one of the examples of the books we use is Five Little Monkeys. Something that is not on this slide that's also in the toolkit are these flashcards that kids get. And I, honestly, when we were first rolling out the math, I wasn't so sure about giving out flashcards to parents for children that have 2 to 5-year-olds. And I was in clinic just actually last Friday, and there's a mom who I know well who has 2 children. She has a 4th grader, and then she also has a 2-year-old. And there's a lot of chronic illness. What we do find is that children that grow up in poverty often have worse poor health outcomes. And so there was a lot for us to talk about in terms of the fact that both children were morbidly obese. There's asthma and allergies, and there were some learning and developmental issues. And as the mom and I were wrapping up the visit, she said, "Dr. Long, can you do me a favor?" And I said, "Sure." She said, "You know, in that bag that you gave me last time, there were some flashcards, and I was wondering if I can get an extra copy because my daughter loves going through those flashcards, and I wanted to keep one in the car and one at home." And I just thought that that's such a great illustration about how, despite the fact that this mom was dealing with a ton, she was using the material, and it was a way for her to engage with her child. So on this slide are some of the findings that have come out of our research study. And as I suggested, that our research study, it was what we call in the medical world a quasi-experimental design, meaning that basically we were interviewing families before the pediatrician went in the room, immediately after the pediatrician went in the room, and then several weeks later. And there were two basic conclusions from our data analysis. And first was that we definitely provided evidence that supported the importance of early literacy skills and math skills, and how that helped to build cognitive readiness and resiliency in young children. And we also proved that the pediatrician is a powerful messenger, as are you guys who are all on this webinar. And so some of the statistics that came out were that 61% of families learned something new from their doctor. Well over half of our families reported that they would actually act differently based upon the intervention. And then when we asked families several weeks later what they remembered about the importance of talking, reading, singing, 96% of families remembered that the doctor talked to them about how critical talking, reading, singing is. So on the next slide are some examples. So what we also did, and this was in conjunction with the UCSF Philip R. Lee Center for Health Policy Studies, is we wanted to get quotes, we wanted to get stories from families about how the messaging stuck. And I'll just read some of these quotes to you. "The book that you gave us was the first book she ever got. She's getting smarter. We go out and buy books for her now. I've always talked, read, and sung to my kids, but I guess having the tools to remind them, to remind me what to do is great. Make those things habits and not afterthoughts. They laugh a lot when I sing. He loves to sing. We do it together. I sing to him, and he sings back. Dad reads at night, and my child says la la la, which means Daddy should sing. And then lastly, she doesn't quite talk, but she speaks to me in the ways that she can." One of the messages that we really stress that this last quote reminded me of is that when we talk to families in a way such that no matter what your native tongue is, you should speak to your child in that native tongue or in English. The point is that we just want you to talk, read, and sing to your child. And that even if the child doesn't verbalize a response to you, they are listening, they are smiling, they are cooing, they are paying attention. And the more you do it, the more the child will hear, and then eventually the more the child will say.
Thanks so much, Dr. Dana Long, for that really wonderful presentation of your work and of your experiences. I don't have to say this yet again, but I will. We're super lucky to have you working with us on the campaign. So before I move to lessons learned and next steps, I thought it would be important to pause again and see if there are questions or thoughts or ideas, and possibly you know, things that you all might be interested in sharing about what you're already doing with families in this area of, you know, early math, early STEM, and just early, you know, brain and language development, talking, reading, and singing.
Well, thank you. I don't see any questions yet, but people may be typing. I'd like to just reflect a little bit on this wonderful, the video was wonderful, and Dr. Long, the stories about your practice. are so inspiring. And to pick up on the comment that you made, Kara, about encouraging play, curiosity, and exploration, I think it's good advice for STEM learning at all ages, and it's so important to breaking down those barriers that folks who may not have a strong educational background feel toward math and science, but to really help them understand that it's really about the natural world, the built world, the world around them, and encouraging discovery and engagement, and then to do it and talk about it with their children. It's such a low threshold, low anxious threshold way to do it. So just emphasize that for everybody. Matches what we've been talking about in teaching STEM to all ages.
Great. So I think I'll move on and take a pause a little bit later and quickly do one thing before we get into lessons learned. I wanted to make sure that folks know that really many of the resources that we've shared today, the videos, the tip sheets on early STEM and early math, and the creative materials are free, open source on our website, available to be downloaded. And the website is toosmall.org. Hopefully that's pretty easy to remember. And in particular for the resources, /community. So that's where we sort of house all of our resources that you can access and do so for free. So briefly on lessons learned, just from working in communities across the country and supporting communities to implement the campaign, really sort of the most important lesson for us, and it was part of our approach, is that this campaign really needs to work for your individual community and the area in which you work, and it needs to work based on what's already on the ground and what's already happening, so that it's integrated and not just this like overlay, and it also needs to be based on what your specific needs are. So it's just really important that it's specific to your needs in your community, and also that it's integrated. And some of the sort of decision points are in terms of doing it in partnership with others who are working with young children, really sort of figuring out exactly sort of what the age is of the kids. Is it going to be 0 to 5? Is it going to be 0 to 3? Is it going to be 2.5 to 5? And also determining who are the trusted messengers. As Dr. Long said, you all are trusted messengers, I think, in terms of your specific work. But who are others, and who are the lead organizations? Can you make it sort of flexible so that you can add new partners or add local businesses if they're interested? And then again, just on the integration piece, making sure that you're enhancing what already exists and you're not sort of duplicating what's on the ground. So on the next slide, we have a couple of questions for discussion. Again, we don't have much time left, and it sounds like people maybe are just kind of absorbing, but these can also be questions for you to sort of ask yourselves. What kinds of family activities, particularly with families with 0 to 5-year-olds, are you currently offering? And do they include messages about talking, reading, and singing, and just meaningful engagement starting at birth? What do you think the things that get in the way of families engaging in these activities would be. A big one, other than maybe not knowing about it, that we've heard about is just like lack of time. And that's sort of why we have the emphasis on incorporating them into everyday routines. And, then finally, are the parents who you're working with already engaging in these activities? We've found that a lot of parents already are, and so our approach has been to really just, sort of encourage them to keep doing it. And, one thing we've heard that may be going on the ground in terms of early STEM in your communities is, or in your particular housing developments or community gardens, and whether or not it might be good to integrate some of these activities into an existing community garden. Water play can be involved in that. Is there on-site childcare, etc. And then finally, these are just some points that, again, if you're interested in kind of organizing something or getting something off the ground with people who already work with young children in your community, these are some things that you can do. And many, if not all of these things are sort of covered on our website, toosmall.org/community. So you can find more detail there. And with that, I will close it up. And Heidi, I don't know if you want to say a few last words.
Well, first I'd like to ask you a question that has come in the question box that maybe you can answer, and that is, how do you encourage engineering concepts in such early learners?
What's that?
The E of STEM.
Yes, exactly. So again, in young children, that would really come from building things, and so whether it's building a some kind of I don't know if it would be like a castle, but something even out of kind of like mud or dirt that's part of a community garden. Certainly, in an early childhood setting, building with blocks, making just even simple towers and knocking them down. And then also just in terms of, encouraging kids to talk about engineering concepts, really encouraging them to sort of describe what they see in the outdoors, like buildings and towers and bridges, and sort of asking specific questions about, as I said before, higher and lower, more and less, to do comparisons. And you can do it just looking at buildings in the neighborhood, and like I said, using specific vocabulary that is kind of STEM vocabulary, like tall and short, pointy and wide, and what kinds, asking kids, or to say, I wonder what kinds of materials or tools or machines that these structures were built with.
And I agree with everything that Cara just said. And another part of it is giving kids the freedom and space to support their creativity and not to necessarily correct them. So in that video, when the baby was struggling to get the block in and out, part of engineering is realizing that something's not working well and then being able to change it or fix it. And so as a parent, to be supportive but not always to be directive.
Those are such great answers and inspiring. It makes me want to go find a baby to play with. And hope that all of you online will go find babies to play with and families with babies and encourage them to play and discover and explore, use these resources, talk, read, and sing every day. Such great advice for all of us, no matter what our age is. And again, I said I'd been on a senior webinar earlier this afternoon, and we emphasized never too old to learn, never too old to teach, never too old to play, and then come here and talk about never too young to learn, never too young to be a teacher of their parents, right? And certainly never too young to play. So thank you so much for all that you've shared with us. I think there's a lot for us to explore, and we can continue to share these resources with other public housing authorities and in our related networks involved in the SEED campaign and in our cities. So this has been very enriching, and we thank you very much, Kara Dukakis and Dr. Dana Long. It's been very fun to think babies with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, everybody. It's 4 o'clock now, so we will let you all leave, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks.